at 5 o'clock this morning and I had my radio on and I heard about a fire in a tower block in West London, and I put the television on and I saw the images and I thought, crikey, I haven't seen anything as frightening as that, frankly, since 9/11. It just looked quite extraordinary. The up-to-date news is that it's been confirmed that 12 people are dead from this fire in the Grenfell Tower in Latimer Road in West London. There are 70 people being treated at 5 different London hospitals, 18 of whom are described as being in critical care. My understanding is that the fire service has got as high as the 12th floor in this building, but in total there were 24 floors. So I'm not going to speculate about what's going to happen to the numbers, but it is a pretty grim scene, to say the very, very least. And I think whichever God you pray to, or whichever belief system you have in your life, perhaps this evening is just one where we take a little bit of time out and think about those that have suffered this horrific tragedy. After London Bridge, we were, I think, pretty amazed how quickly the Armed Response Unit got to the scene, and similarly, the reports that I've heard are that the fire services were on the scene within 6 minutes of this being reported, and it was reported at 00.54, so just before 1 o'clock in the morning was when the first reports were there, and by 1 o'clock there were fire engines and firefighters there. 45 fire engines in total turned up. 200 firefighters were there tackling the blaze, many of whom actually going into the building. And if you remember 9/11 and what happened with the building collapse, you've got to have some real guts, haven't you, to do that job. So perhaps we should also pause and think a little bit about the bravery of the men and women that do jobs like this. So, we've been listening over the last couple of hours to those that have been attempting to coordinate the emergency response. And speaking outside the Grenfell Tower, Met Police Commander Stuart Cundy recently gave us this update.
This remains an active operation from our colleagues from the Fire Brigade. Sadly, I can confirm that 12 people that have died that we know of. This is going to be a long and complex recovery operation, and I do anticipate that the number of fatalities will sadly increase beyond those 12. And the thoughts of all of us from the emergency services, and I'm sure colleagues from the local authority and local council and all of Londoners, our thoughts will be with those that have been so affected by what is, as you heard here, a fire of a scale and a precedence that we've probably not seen in London for many, many years. I've said before, and I'd reiterate again, from a police perspective, what's really important is that we identify and account for everybody. We've had call handlers in our casualty bureau taking hundreds of calls today. Now, our experience shows us in cases like this, it's very, very challenging to put a number on how many people are unaccounted for. Our priority is clearly those that we know would have been resident within Grenfell Tower, but indeed there might have been others that were staying with family or friends. So if you do have any concerns, please contact the Casualty Bureau.
Well, talking of that Casualty Bureau that Stuart Cundy there was talking about, you can get in touch with the Met Police Casualty Bureau if you've got concerns about anybody that's missing or information. Perhaps somebody who lives in that tower was staying with you on holiday or whatever. Any of that information is what the Met Police need, and they can be contacted on 0800 0961 233. That's 0800 0961 233. And if you didn't get time to jot that down, I'll make sure that it's on the lbc.co.uk website right now. OK. Also, at that press conference, Steve Apter, the Director of Safety and Assurance for London Fire Brigade, also gave us this update.
I can confirm I have had firefighters manage to get through particularly arduous conditions up to the top floor. They were hampered for some time by a fractured gas main, which was really difficult and challenging for the utilities to be able to isolate. That obviously, as you can imagine, created quite significant hazard. Once that was isolated, the crews were able to progress. Conditions in the tower, and you can see for yourselves, the fire's been burning for some time. The integrity of the building is a significant issue for us as a hazard, but I can confirm crews did make it to the top floor.
Are there still any flame?
Yeah, there are still pockets of fire yet to be extinguished in particularly difficult places to reach, and hence I've said we will be on scene for a long time. So firefighters, I've got a limited crew inside because I need to manage the risk to my firefighters, and what they are doing is assessing and looking at the situation. We've actually got a capability from Kent Fire Service, drones, so we're using drones to be able to create access and visibility to certain parts of the building to be able to assess the integrity of the building to enable me to plan further ahead.
And once again, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has an horrendous incident to turn up to, and he gave his thanks to all those involved in this emergency. Here's Sadiq Khan.
Also make tribute to the amazing emergency services from the fire service. We have more than 250 firefighters, many of whom have been here from the beginning, including the Commissioner. There'll be many more working during the course of the day. Many engines and machinery here, and fire service from neighbouring fire services helping us out today. Also, London Ambulance Service, more than 100 paramedics helping out during the course of the night, and more than 100 police officers. And it's worth reminding ourselves that when there are these tragic fires, these emergencies, there are literally emergency services, our firefighters running towards the fire, running towards the danger, whilst encouraging others to run away. We do know that a number of people have died, I'm afraid, and the Commander has given you the figures that we have. I'm afraid it's likely that the figures are going to go up.
Well, as Sadiq Khan said, as the public are being urged to run away, the firefighters are running in there to deal with it. And I repeat what I said earlier, it takes real guts to do what those men and women do. Have to say, I'm not sure that I could do it. If you were in the area at the time, if you've been affected in any way by this tragedy, if you've at any point had any reason to be concerned about the fire risk in high-rise blocks that were put up in the 1960s or 70s, and bear in mind this particular tower block was built in 1974, but did have a sort of substantial refurb which took place last year. So if you've got anything to contribute to this argument, then do let me know on 0345 60 60973. You can text me at 84850. You can tweet me on @LBC. Not forgetting the hashtag Farage and LBC. And let's go live now to the scene, to LBC's reporter there, Patrick Hildred. Patrick, good evening.
Good evening. I'm just looking across at Grenfell Tower, completely blackened, of course. You can see intermittently a hose going up about halfway up to the building. And you mentioned the brave firefighters that ran towards the scene. I've just seen one of them come here towards the media scrum where that press conference was held earlier, as you were just playing some of the clips from it, with the police confirming that the number of people confirmed dead had risen from 6 to 12.
Yes.
Now, of course, there has been quite the relief effort, people coming to help and give food and other donations. And part of that is Saeed Ali, who's with me now from Muntada Aid. And that's an international aid organisation, but it is based in Fulham. So the West London Islamic Cultural Centre is nearby, and that's where they've been helping out. Saeed, just tell us a bit about what you've been doing at the centre today.
Yes, well, we've been watching this unfold like many people today, and we decided that we needed to do something. And part of that was to open our doors in partnership with WLICC, where we're able to host anybody who's been affected by this fire. We can provide accommodation, we can provide food, we can provide washing facilities or showers. So this is what we have done in response to this, but also coming down here just to see what the needs of those affected people are in the centres here as well. Many of the people are, their main concern really is accommodation, and of course their loved ones. They're worried about missing people. We've been in touch with a former primary school teacher who worked at one of our centres, the Al Muntada School, and she's informed us, because she lives on the opposite tower and she's been evacuated. She's informed us that at least 5 children are missing from who attended the school. So obviously this is a huge shock for all of us, and you know, we don't really know where they are, or if in fact they've passed away, because some of a family of 5 with the 3 children, they were on the 23rd floor, so that's, you know, really high up. So there's a lot of worry for these families, and from Muntada Aid ourselves, you know, our hearts and condolences are with the families that have been affected by this blaze.
And so these centres where people can come and stay the night, presumably also a place where people can get emotional support from each other.
Absolutely, and it's an Islamic centre. At the same time, most of the people here were fasting as well. It's the month of Ramadan. We can provide their iftar meals. We can provide advice and support, financial support if need be as well. So this is what we're trying to do. I mean, we brought one of the imams from the centre to these centres here close to the tower blocks, and the doctors were telling us that some of the people are fasting and they need to have some medication. Can they not break their fast? And so we had to speak to the families and tell them that you can break your fast, that this is important that you have your medication. So we were able to provide that kind of support as well, spiritual support as well.
And how quickly did this all spring into action?
It's incredible. I mean, there's been support from all kinds of places, not just the four corners of London, but across the country. And people have been coming down to this area in Kensington, and they've been providing clothes, they've been providing food, they've been providing water, sanitation item as well. So people have been fast, and things like this are still coming in. And what we're also trying to push as well, and is to support the local authorities as well, and just try to get them to give them a quick accommodation. But it's important that they can have this space to kind of cool down, because they're still up from last night, many of these people, and they haven't had a sleep.
Patrick, thank you, and thank you to everybody, the emergency services, the volunteers that we've just heard that are coming in to help and provide the basics and food and water and where to stay and all the rest of it. I think we're all shocked and I think really horrified by those images of that tower block being ablaze. In just a few moments, I'll be joined by a former firefighter who's there at the scene to get more on just exactly what these men and women faced when they went into that building today. Shock and horror in West London this morning as the Grenfell Tower in Latimer Road, West London, goes up ablaze, and we know already that 12 people are dead. Already there is talk, I'm hearing, that the fire alarms, they may have gone off in the individual buildings, but the fire alarms did not go off in the building as a whole. Talk about why, if it was a refurb, there weren't sprinkler systems in place. And this is very unusual, because normally when there is something as horrible as this that happens, people don't start to drill down and start looking for blame, but I'm sensing that beginning to happen already, and I'm also sensing that there are people out there living in these tower blocks that were built back in the 1960s and 70s who do have, I think, some genuine concerns. And one of them, I believe, is Mike in Bromley. Mike, good evening.
Oh, hello there, Nigel. Terrific to talk to you.
Rather a sad moment to do it. But so, Mike, tell me, what's your experience of this?
Now, I used to live over in a tower block in the New Cross area. It was on the Woodpecker Estate, and I was vice chairman of the Tenants Association over there, and we campaigned for some money that came through City Challenge to have those tower blocks demolished, and we were successful with that. And
were you? So, who did you lobby, Mike, to get this done?
Joan Ruddock helped us.
Yep.
But we gathered a lot of information through the London Fire Authority, and they told us, I was living in this building, there was over 120 fires in the particular building that I was in. Now, most of those fires were kind of like shoot fires, so like smoke and just one of the shoot burning. But I woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning and my front door was hot and my flat was full of smoke. And I called the fire services, and they told me to stay put. And I was just out of reach of those tall ladders, but I was absolutely terrified.
Mike, when was this tower block constructed?
This was the tower block. I'm not certain. I think they're late 60s. I mean, I lived there from 87, and they were demolished. But one of the key things about this is that although there were 6 tower blocks, and 5 of them were demolished, but there was a big one, a really big one. It was about 24 stories. Our one was about 16, and the 24-story one, they decided they wouldn't demolish it, but they would put a concierge in it, and then they put all this cladding around it.
As indeed I understand, Grenfell Tower had some fresh cladding put on just last year.
Yeah, I mean, this one's been going there. I mean, this is the only one out of all those 6 that were there, but that has got this cladding around it. I'm not sure if it's the same cladding. I don't know what those people think about now that are living in that building, but I'll tell you, I'm glad to have got out of that.
Yeah, well, Mike, I think you raised a general concern, perhaps, about these tower blocks that were built in that period, and, you know, it is possible that not enough quite has been done. What we'll do, Mike, on that point about cladding, is we will go to an expert or two during the rest of this show, because there were some reports that suggested that actually the cladding itself got to a temperature and actually caught fire. Mike, I thank you for telling me about that and your experience and indeed success in getting some of these places knocked down. Abdul in Kensington, what's your point of view on this?
My point of view, literally, I'm just calling up just to say thank you to all the people that have been participating in this community. I've never seen a community get together so great.
Yep.
The young, the old, everybody got together. I've been out since 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
Literally looking out, giving people advice, where to go, what to do. I visited most of the clubs, which is the youth clubs, the youth centres that have been open, to see who needs help, maybe in translation, as people couldn't speak English. And the rest of it. But what I am finding, the media is mostly around the area of the Grenfell Tower.
Yep.
And, I mean, now I'm actually in Al-Manar, the mosque in North Kensington. Mm-hmm. And it's, you know what, the greatest feeling, everybody from every nation is here. And there's no media to show how much young people are actually doing to help this cause. Well,
Abdul, let's be fair. I can't speak for everybody else. But let's be fair to LBC, because just a few moments ago, before the break, I had Patrick Hildred on, who's there at the scene, and who was interviewing a young Muslim man from a charity, and it was a Muslim charity that were there helping people. So I think, Abdul, as far as LBC's concerned, I think we have reflected fully that the community together, you know, have worked on this. And all I can say to you, if you've been up since 3 a.m, out there doing it, Abdul, full marks to you. Well done. Absolutely terrific. Thank you. I'm going to go now to Ben Bradford, who is a fire safety engineer. And he's managing director of a risk and resilience consulting firm. Ben, good evening.
Good evening.
Now, as I said a moment ago, normally when something awful like this happens, there is the sense of shock and horror and upset. But already I'm hearing quite considerable criticisms and worries coming out from a lot of people about the safety of this building. What can you tell us?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd just like to say I'm deeply saddened by the tragic loss of life and painfully aware that there's a lot of anger among the general public, and I guess a number of questions being raised in the media about, is stay put safe, or the alarms were too quiet, and
yes,
why was there only one stair, or why is there no sprinklers? And a number of whilst these are issues that are worth consideration, that they, I think that the main factors of consideration revolve around the cladding and compartmentation, and I guess why a external fire spread fire would penetrate the building in the way that it did.
But isn't the sort of extraordinary thing just how quickly this fire appeared to take hold?
Yes, it is. It is an unprecedented fire, and I think there has been a lot of speculation as to what the exact causes are and how it spread so quickly. But I think we need to wait until the full findings of the fire investigation come out before we speculate too much. And there's been a lot of criticism of national building regulations.
I've heard some of this, yeah.
Yeah. I think that fire precautions in the UK are among the best in the world. I think that our fire safety legislation and guidance does a very good job, and I'm sure that in time we'll get the answers to all of the questions that are being posed.
Well, let me ask you a question, Ben. You know, this building put up in the early 70s, and there were a lot, weren't there? From the mid-60s to the mid-70s, there were quite a lot of this type of building put up. If you compare, you know, as an expert, the risk of those buildings compared to a new build, are the older buildings less safe?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Older buildings can be of solid construction, and I think generally people are safer from fire in their homes than at any point in recent history. This is a tragic event that is unprecedented, and the purpose of legislation is not to bring old buildings into compliance with modern standards. It's really to take a risk-based view and decide what fire precautions are necessary.
No, Ben, I understand you can't eliminate all risk. I also, would have thought when the argument about sprinklers comes into play, I mean, presumably putting sprinkler systems into every flat would be a very, very expensive thing to do.
Well, there is, of course, a cost to sprinklers, and we've got to kind of weigh up our knowledge of fire safety, and this is unprecedented that fire has spread from one compartment to another, and we've got multiple compartments on fire because blocks of flats are usually designed as single compartments, and we don't expect fire to spread from one compartment to another because they're designed to withstand that. So sprinklers do a very good job of putting out fires, but they may not be effective in fires within cavities, for example, because sprinklers just aren't within cavities. And the other thing is that there were studies that were undertaken a number of years ago now that looked at where fatalities occur and why, and a large proportion of the fatalities occur in the room of fire origin, where the fire starts. And of course, it's not usual for people to die due to flame. It's usually the smoke that's the killer, and of course sprinklers are activated on.
Ben, would you advise people not to rush to judgment on this? Is that really what you're saying? Let's wait. Let's find out the facts. This could well be just a freak, horrendous accident. I would say let's not make hasty assumptions, and they're not helpful to the objectivity of the investigation that's yet to follow. Okay. Ben, I'm going to have to stop you there. Thank you. That was Ben Bradford, a fire safety engineer, managing director of BB7, a risk and resilience consulting firm. In a few moments, LBC's political editor Theo Usherwood will be here to get some of the political reaction to this horrible event. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show. As the stories come in about the fire at Grenfell Tower in Latimer Road, West London this morning, we're all pretty shocked and horrified. One or two people are rushing to judgment, and we just a moment ago had, a fire expert on saying, hey, just give this time, let's wait and see. It looks like one of those really odd, freakish, horrendous accidents. Joining me now is LBC's political editor, Theo Usherwood. Theo, is there some political kickback to this already?
There is, Nigel, and that's for the simple reason that following a fire at a block of flats back in 2009 of South London in Camberwell, a place called Lakanal House, there were some recommendations made by a coroner, which included the mandatory installation of a sprinkler system. And as a result of that, there was a recommendation by an all-party parliamentary group headed by a man called Ronnie King, a former chief fire officer, who said that the government should implement these changes. Now, it got kicked on from one housing minister to another housing minister, and the last housing minister to consider this but do nothing was a man called Gavin Barwell, who happens to be the new chief of staff to the Prime Minister Theresa May. Now, I was speaking to Jeremy Corbyn earlier on today, and he said there were searching and difficult questions for the Tories on this issue, and he also raised the spectre of public spending cuts, Nigel, which of course...
Isn't that a bit premature, Theo?
Kickback. Yeah. And you're quite right to say that, Nigel.
Yeah.
You're quite right to say that. That prompted kickback from other political parties were saying, exactly how can you link cuts to the emergency services, to the NHS, to housing or whatever, to this fire? And there was he rode back on that. Mr. Corbyn rode back on that.
Has there been, Theo, any statement from Gavin Barwell?
Not yet. The Prime Minister just issued a very short statement through her spokesman, saying that she was deeply saddened by what had happened. It was a straightforward statement. She hasn't appeared in front of the television cameras yet. That may, of course, change. And of course, she also said that the government was convening I should say the government, I mean, it's the Conservative Party at the moment because there is no government, was convening the Civil Contingencies Committee, which is, a conglomeration of experts who can work out how to support the emergency services as they go through the very dire, grim task of having to investigate this fire in West London.
Yeah, and Theo, while you're with me, within the last hour or so, Tim Farron has resigned as leader of the Liberal Democrats. Let's just listen to what Farron said.
Now, I am a Liberal to my fingertips, and that liberalism means that I am passionate about defending the rights and liberties of people who believe very different things to me. There are Christians in politics who take the view that they should impose the tenets of their faith on society. But I have not taken that approach because I fundamentally disagree with it. It is not liberal, and actually it's counterproductive when it comes to advancing the gospel. Even so, I seem to have been the subject of suspicion because of what I believe and who my faith is in which case we are kidding ourselves if we think we yet live in a tolerant, liberal society. And that's why I have chosen to step down as leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Theo, is this just an excuse for having not done very well in the election, or does he actually mean it?
A bit of both. I mean, the Liberal Democrats got 14 seats. At the beginning of the campaign, there was talk of 30, 40 seats, righting the wrongs of 2015 and getting back to the position they'd enjoyed under Charlie Kennedy and Nick Clegg. But of course, this question about Tim Farron's views when it came to homosexuality, the refusal when repeatedly questioned to say that he didn't think homosexuality or homosexual sex was a sin, just dogged the campaign, and it had real cut through. And Lord Brian Paddock resigned this afternoon, said he couldn't serve in Tim Farron's top team as shadow as the Lib Dem spokesman on home affairs. But Mr. Farron, it was very, very difficult. It had cut through, and many people felt that they had to blame. His argument, of course, Nigel, and I should say this, and you heard it a little bit there, is that what he believes in private is very different to what he believes when he's in his role as leader of the Liberal Democrats. And I question this, and that you can actually do that, and the public think that that's a perfectly acceptable position. It's a little bit like saying you finish your show and you go home, you put on a pair of sandals and eat granola. It's not you.
No. Theo, I pour a large glass of something. Don't worry about that. But wouldn't it have been better if Farron had just been upfront about it? People have different opinions. People have different religious beliefs. I mean, my view is that political leaders run away from media criticism, thinking it'll put off all the voters. I think we're grown up enough to respect the fact different people have different views.
Well, I think your analysis is right, Nigel. If you're the leader of a libertarian party like UKIP, but if there's some, you can have different views, and that's perfectly acceptable. I think the problem for Tim Farron is he's always taken this slightly preachy tone about what liberal values are and standing up for refugees and the appeal that he's trying to get across, and then at the same time he can't say something which the people he's trying to appeal to, and I get that they're not saying people who appeal to UKIP are trying to attract, or the Conservatives are trying to attract, don't agree with. And that's the problem that that's the problem. And that's where he was hammered. And I think you're right to say about your analysis about, we should all be grown-ups about it. But of course he was being hammered both by Labour and the Conservatives on this issue.
But that's politics, Theo.
And they're raising the issue. That is politics, and he lost.
Listen, when I was UKIP leader, I was being hammered by everybody. But that's the way that he is. Listen,
you made a virtue of it, Nigel.
I did. You're right, Theo. Listen, thank you ever so much indeed. Now, while we've been looking at this horror in London, equally in the United States of America. there's been a really unusual and pretty horrific incident, and I'm going to cross to Simon Marks, LBC's Washington correspondent. Simon, we've not really heard much about this story, but a gunman has been out firing bullets at a member of Congress. Tell us more.
Yes, Nigel, absolutely horrifying events here in Washington, D.C. that have shocked people on this side of the Atlantic, just as people in London have been so awfully shocked by events in Shepherd's Bush. It was early this morning. As you know, there isn't much these days that brings Democrats and Republicans together in Congress, but baseball does. And there's an annual baseball match where the Democrats take on the Republicans. And this morning they were having a practice for it down in Alexandria, Virginia, which is just on the other side of the Potomac River from downtown Washington, D.C. And in the early hours of the morning, that baseball practice was punctuated by the sound of gunfire. A man with a rifle, who we now know died in crossfire with Capitol Hill security staff who were protecting members of Congress at that baseball practice, opened fire. There are conflicting reports about whether he asked other spectators to identify Republicans among the players on the field, but certainly we know that a prominent Republican lawmaker, Congressman Steve Scalise, he is the Republicans' whip in the House of Representatives, so a powerful and important Republican figure, was among the 5 people injured. The other 4, we believe, were Capitol Hill security staff and congressional staffers, and the gunman has now been identified here as James Hodgkinson, a man who left a long social media trail behind him, very critical of President Donald Trump. He had campaigned for Bernie Sanders during last year's presidential election when Bernie Sanders, the socialist senator from Vermont, was battling Hillary Clinton for the Democratic Party nomination. Bernie Sanders has said he's shocked and appalled by what has happened. President Trump addressed the nation just a few hours ago and expressed his grave concern about events, saying that he was a good friend of Congressman Scalise and he was sending best wishes to all of those people who had been affected by this. But security now tighter at the U.S. Capitol than it has been as a result of all of this. I think there's some relief that this wasn't related to any kind of international terrorism, but also concern, of course, that this does appear to have been a case of domestic political violence.
Yeah, horrendous. And as you say, politically motivated. Another deeply unpleasant story. Simon, I thank you, and I'll be with you in your Washington bureau tomorrow, where I will broadcast the show from. Thank you very much indeed. In a few moments, we're going to cross to my fellow LBC presenter, Matt Stadlen, who lives very close to Grenfell Tower, and he'll give us a bit of a feel of how the local community has reacted to all of this. Right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show. We're talking about the horror of the Grenfell Tower catching fire dramatically at 1 o'clock this morning in Latimer Road in West London. 12 people already that we know of dead, 18 in a critical condition, and nearly 80 people scattered across 5 London hospitals. But I want to do just one more political story. We talked about Tim Farron standing down his resignation and him saying, and OK, they did not get the number of votes they wanted, but saying that actually, being a Christian, he found it being completely impassable that he couldn't do that and be leader of the Liberal Democrats, which I have to say I think is really a bit sad. Another story here that the Mirror are reporting that I think is pretty extraordinary. The Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, has called for 1 million people to take to the streets to force Theresa May from power. He urges protesters, get out on the streets in support of Labour's anti-austerity message. Well, and build pressure for another election. I'm sorry, Mr. McDonnell, but we had a general election last week, and we had results. And unless you think there's anything wrong with the way in which that election was conducted, and you haven't said so, the thing about democracy is that it stops us taking to the streets. It's a safety valve. We don't need mob rule. We don't need intimidation. It's why we have elections. And I think this is a really, really worrying development if somebody as senior in British politics as John McDonnell is effectively urging mob rule. I condemn it completely. Please, listeners, if you think I'm wrong, if you think McDonald's entirely right to do that, then please, 0345 60 60 973. But let's get back to the horrors of Grenfell Tower in West London. And we're going to go to Matt Stadlen, fellow LBC presenter, who I understand lives very close by in the area. Matt, good evening.
A very good evening to you, Nigel. So sad to speak to you on such a day as this. It's been a terrible blow to the local community. Where I'm standing right now, I can still see what appear to be flames flickering in one of the upper floors, maybe 18 or 19. But there is another side to all this, which is that I am incredibly proud of the local community, the local communities who really have, of probably every faith and colour that you could imagine, got together to help each other out today. It's been a remarkable show of solidarity.
Yes, I mean we've had some interviews tonight from a local Muslim group and other people ringing in saying they've been out since 3 o'clock in the morning and helping. Did you? I mean, what time were you aware of this tragedy was unfolding?
Well, I heard a helicopter late last night and thought it must be a local burglary. It was only this morning when my fiancée woke me up with terrible news. I went straight down at about 8:30. I've been pretty much here on and off all day. In fact, I'm going to be taking in a lovely lady from the 7th floor who managed to escape the fire. She didn't actually smell any smoke. She got out okay, and she'll be coming to live with us probably for about a month, making sure,
okay,
of course, that she's also going to be on her waiting list. But the key message here is that people from every walk of life, because Notting Hill, as you'll know, is a very, very mixed community, have really been rallying around. There's been such an outpouring of generosity, of human kindness, of empathy as well. And I've bumped into neighbours of mine when I was growing up in the rather more affluent areas of Notting Hill, all coming along trying to do their bit. And I tell you what, I've been part of a human chain with people from every walk of life, again, just passing down bags of food, bags of clothes, trying to get things where they're needed most. So there's been an incredible rallying around. And I suppose if there is any silver lining, and it's hard to see one on a day like today, especially as there may well be news of further fatalities. Well, that's it, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, the community coming together and helping each other, as you're doing by taking someone in to live with you who is now homeless, and I guess she's without her possessions as well. People have lost, there are lives lost, and I know that possessions don't matter as much, but people have lost literally everything. And the other thing, Matt, I'm really struck by is the story that we did sort of half an hour ago where, the firefighters are shouting at people to get out of the area as they themselves are going into it. And that's pretty remarkable stuff.
I've seen so many firefighters today just returning exhausted from heroic shifts, right from early this morning to late afternoon. These people really are the everyday heroes of our society. So that community has been absolutely incredible. I went to one of the local churches that has been a point for people to come and take food and get encouragement and support. And one of the things that I noticed was someone announced there was going to be 2 quiet places, Nigel, for people to pray, a Christian area and a Muslim area. People were going to be able to pray side by side. And at that point, there was a round of applause. But I'd want to make this point as well, because it's important. This is not just about the local community around here, Ladbroke Grove, Latimer Road. This is about people from across London. We've had people coming from right across London just to help and to be here and to donate. And it does make me proud to be a Londoner. But as a local, my overriding emotion today is one of terrible sadness.
Yes, of course.
I've had really, truly horrible stories of what's gone on in the early hours of this morning.
Yes, I must admit, I've heard 1 or 2 of those stories, and I don't even want to hear them, Matt. They're so awful. Matt Stadlen, fellow LBC presenter, local resident in the area, thank you ever so much for telling us about how the community in adversity and horror have come together to work with each other to help everybody, which is at least a little bit of a silver lining on what's been a pretty awful day. I'm going to go to Fire Brigades Union Executive Council member for London, Ian Lehair, who's there at the site. Ian, good evening.
Good evening.
So, Ian, is this the biggest fire that the London Fire Brigades have had to deal with in modern times?
It's certainly one of the most devastating fires that they've had to deal with. I think the level of fire spread is unprecedented, as has been said before by fire officers. I think the firefighters and control staff in the London Fire Brigade have been, as your previous presenter said, heroic. They have worked till exhaustion without a shadow of a doubt. And I've spoke personally to a number of the crew members that have left the scene to go back. Bearing in mind, many of these are supposed to be back on duty tonight, and they've been here from the early hours until late afternoon.
Was there ever, Ian?
They are exhausted.
Ian, was there ever a thought that might have crossed people's mind that maybe this building could collapse at some point?
I think there's been some speculation about the building potentially collapsing, but I've been reassured by senior managers that the structural engineer has been on site all day, that they say that it has been safe for our members to go into the building and to carry out their duty, which they've done tremendously.
Tell me, on a human level, Ian, how on earth do you train people? They're professionals and they're trained. How are you trained? What?
You don't train them.
How could you? You couldn't possibly replicate this in training, could you?
You can't train them for this. You can only train them to make them professional, to go in there and use the tools of the trade that they've got available to them. And once they're in there, they will do their best efforts and they will put their lives on the line. Just as I've seen today, I've seen people coming out there that frankly should not have been in there because they were so exhausted, but they would not. They would not refuse to go in. They've gone in there because they knew people needed them.
And Ian, we've talked to fire safety experts, one of whom has suggested that we should not yet rush to judgment on what has happened here, but others, as you will have heard, expressing concern that even this building, there were some concerns expressed about last year. Are you in any way concerned about these 60s and 70s high-rise blocks?
I'm not concerned about the structure of the buildings built in 1974 or 60s. I am concerned about the way the standard of refurbishment's been done, because if they're refurbing these buildings, then surely in 21st century we should be starting to install sprinkler systems into these buildings. So I do think that needs to be part of the inquiry that will come out of this.
I think we're going to hear a lot more about that, Ian. Thank you very much. And I've got time for one very quick call from Notting Hill Gate. Aziz, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Nigel. How are you?
I'm all right. Obviously, pretty upset for everybody living in your part of the world. What are your observations, Aziz?
Well, I live in one of the towers in the area, and a couple of things I can, say that has been, or I've seen personally, because in my own flat, take for example, the fire alarm doesn't work.
Yeah, so and again, we heard stories about that. And Aziz, we're running out of time. You've got 25 seconds. What was the other point you wanted to make?
Well, the other point I wanted to make is about the antisocial behaviours on the staircase. So even when you want to get out of the house, to get out of the building, there might be some things in the stairs that might scare you out. So it's a case of clearing those places and ensuring that people have safe access to get out of the building should, fire comes up in other towers.
Well, I hope, Aziz, there were no cases of that last night. Listen, I'm sorry, we've run out of time. I'm going to have to let you go. But the point there being made by Aziz, fire alarms not working, and that is a story that we've heard from today. My final thought on this is, it is, I think, much too early for anyone to rush to judgment. It may well be there are people at fault. It may well be not enough was done. But, sometimes accidents happen. Sometimes terrible things do happen in life. We shouldn't rush to judgment. But I think what we all should do, whatever our belief systems or faiths or religions, we should all tonight, before we go to bed, just spare a thought for these people whose lives have been literally destroyed today in this horrible fire.